Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Bumgardner.
And I'm Harrison Stewart.
So our first episode, here we are, Season 1, Episode 1, Jet-Assisted Chevy and Pop Rocks and Soda. It originally aired Thursday, January 23rd, 2003. This was one of the original pilots. There were three original Mythbusters pilots. They are the first three episodes of the show that were shot, I believe, all about the same time. You can kind of see in this episode, if you look in the background, you can see other myths from the season. You can see different experiments and stuff that were being built at the time.
Yeah.
So these were, I think, shot at the same time, but this is one of three of the original pilots. And I wanted to pull out, there's a lot of kind of top level stuff to get out of the way because this is the very first episode, but we should do a little bit of admin right at the top and mention to people, Max, perhaps unsurprisingly, has some stuff wrong. So if you go to season 1, if you go to Mythbusters on Max, which you should do, and you pull up season 1, it will appear as though season 1 is only like 3 episodes long.
I did notice that.
For some reason, they have combined seasons 2 and 1. So a lot of season 1 episodes are actually in season 2. So for the purposes of this podcast, we are going off of the IMDb listing for episodes, which are the best of my knowledge and research. And I spent way too much time trying to figure this out.
I believe that
is correct. So if you log on to Max and go, what the hell is going on? This doesn't match the podcast. That is why. Go to IMDb. That is the listing that we are pulling our information from. Hopefully Max will fix it. I'm sure that Mr. Max is listening to the podcast right now, and we'll get on that right away. The show is directed by Peter Reese. Now that is a name that may not be familiar for a lot of Mythbusters fans because he wasn't on camera. But Peter Reese is the creator and executive producer of Mythbusters. He was with the show for more than 70 episodes. So if you like Mythbusters, he is one of the people I assume you have to thank as one of the creators. I did a little bit of research about him, and I was so pleased by what I found out.
Oh, boy.
So first and foremost, I thought this was an interesting point that some listeners and even big Mythbusters fans might not know. Reese actually grew up in Sydney, Australia, and a lot of people don't know that Mythbusters is an Australian show.
What?
So Beyond Entertainment, who produces Mythbusters, is based, I believe to this day, in Sydney, Australia. The show was edited in Australia. So they would actually, I've heard them talk about that one of the great things about making Mythbusters in California was that literally 24 hours a day the show was being made because of the time difference. So they would shoot the show, right? They would shoot the show in San Francisco, ship the tapes at the time to Australia, and the show would be edited in Sydney. So there was a 24/7 transcontinental production cycle going on for Mythbusters.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So it's not like an office where it's like there was an Australian Mythbusters and then we had our own.
Right.
It's just Australian made.
The production of Beyond was based in Australia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Australia.
I know. And the humor, if you watch a lot of like either British or Australian TV shows and stuff, you can feel it in the humor. So I think that's something to keep an eye on as we go throughout the show is going back to like that magic. Part of the magic is it's a different voice. There are like the writers and producers of the show, not necessarily the same folks you're used to on American TV, which is kind of cool.
Fair enough.
But my favorite thing I learned about Peter Reese when I researched this man, I found his bio. And the bio had one line that I probably should have done more research on, but I didn't want to. I read this one line and said, I'm happy just knowing this about the creator of Mythbusters.
Yes.
And it said that in 1993, Peter Reese circumnavigated the globe by land and sea. That's all I know, and that's all I want to know. I want the guy who created Mythbusters to be like some adventurous weirdo in a balloon.
See, that's what got me, though.
Yeah.
You'll notice it doesn't say by air.
Oh, see, you're right.
He is limited to land and sea.
You're right.
I would have assumed a more adventure, perhaps some sort of Zeppelin situation.
Made of household objects.
Yes. I mean, in an ideal scenario, we're going treasure planet ships. Duh. But if I can't have that, at least a hot air balloon.
Yes, but that is absolutely who I want to know is behind Mythbusters. So hopefully we'll learn more about this guy as he goes on, because he's a name that, like I said, you don't hear a lot of the behind the scenes names from the show.
Yeah.
A few people kind of made it into the mythos around the show, but not as many. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as we go. This is also, of course, the very first appearance of our boys, Jamie Hyneman and Adam Savage, the hosts of Mythbusters, household names at this point.
Yes.
for anyone who's listening to this and somehow doesn't know, and I can't imagine that would be the case, but Jamie and Adam are both legends of Hollywood and commercial special effects. They have credits from the Star Wars prequels, 7-Up commercials. If you remember the 7-Up commercial where the drink machine shot cans out, that was a Jamie Hyneman creation. And these guys are still working today, even though Mythbusters, like we said before, went off the air in 2013. They are still around. Adam has the very, very successful Tested YouTube channel, which if anyone hasn't checked that out, it's fantastic. Really recommend it. And Jamie Hyneman, a bit harder to find what he's up to today. He is kind of stepped back from public life, but he's still inventing. He's worked with the military, M5 Industries. His company is now doing inventions and working with government groups to try to, I read that he made a firefighting robot and some of this kind of stuff. Pretty wild. And I also saw
Jamie Hyneman going to invent RoboCop.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Well, here's the other thing, and this is such a Jamie Hyneman thing because over the course of the show, he becomes like Sasquatch. There's just every possible bit of lore you can imagine about Jamie. And it said that something I read said that in November of 2021, he was appointed as a professor of practice at a university in Finland. Yep. Finland. So he's still out there and he's still teaching and he's
practicing Finland.
Still inventing, taking that mustache and beret around the world. So
absolutely.
Also the very first appearance, if you can call it that, vocal appearance of narrator Robert Lee. Robert Lee, a guy who I don't think gets talked about enough in the history of Mythbusters. From the moment I cut on the show, his voice made me feel like I was home.
Yes.
We're going to get into this, that the show is wildly different from what I remember Mythbusters being.
Agreed.
However, his voice made it feel like home. He narrated over 280 episodes of the show. He's still a working narrator today, also based in Australia. And just it's so hard to really summarize how important his voice is as the glue behind the show.
Yeah.
He is in every single myth. He is as much a part of the show as Adam and Jamie, and you never see his face and you never hear him talked about.
Yeah.
So I'm starting the Robert Lee Appreciation Club right now because
I'll join.
He's fantastic and remained fantastic for the whole run of the show. And also, first appearance to get in, the very first appearance, even though it's in the background and she is uncredited, of Carrie Byron.
Yes.
Carrie Byron would later become another Mythbuster. A host of the show, famously with Grant Imahara and Tori Beleche, appears very briefly in the montage at the beginning and in the background. During an episode, correct?
Yes, correct. But did you notice anything about her appearance?
Not in particular.
They are. I made note. I actually can't read the note since we agreed not to use language, but what the context is that the narrator is saying, and Jamie has 20 years of experience in whatever, which he puts to great use. And he's just like photo imaging her butt. That is
I didn't even catch that. That's from like the airplane seat episode later on, I think.
Yes, it is.
We haven't watched any more than the first episode, so I don't know, but I think that's what it was.
I think it is. It is relevant. I mean, he's not just doing it, but like the way that it's framed is like, that's our introduction to her. That's her first
that's
appearance.
Awesome. I mean, it is fitting to what you would end up having to do on Mythbusters over the course. Everyone got embarrassed, I feel like, over the course of this show.
I think it's a part of it.
That's a great guy.
Except I think Jamie is like immune to embarrassment in a way. Like he's just one of those people that just slides off.
He has a robot moment in this episode. And we're going to get there. But oh my God. He has a moment of just sheer Jamie Hyneman, what are you? That happens coming out of one of the commercials that killed me. Absolutely took me to my knees with laughter.
Same.
He is, oh my God. We should say though, or at the top, we've talked about it a little bit. What are your general thoughts? First time seeing this episode in a very long time for both of us. What did you think coming out of it?
I liked it a lot. I was, okay, two bird's eye view things that were either different from how I remembered or just slightly off. They seemed, especially in the first case. So there are two kind of myths in this episode.
Right.
The first one is the rocket car, right? Can you strap, or there is a story of a guy strapping a rocket to the top of his car. It got lift off for a little bit and then like exploded into the side of a mountain. Fine. But that is something that I don't remember about Mythbusters, about them taking a specific instance, looking into a very like hyper particular urban legend, as it were, and trying to see if that was possible. It was much more like the second one, which just had to do with if you drink 6 cans of beep and 6 bags of Pop Rocks, will your stomach explode?
Right. A specific case that they could.
Right, exactly. That I seemed to remember that it was just more general things, like if you tailgate a giant Mack truck, will you get better mileage?
Right.
I remember that one. This was like do we think, and the reason why I think they ended up changing it later is that it gets confusing.
Yeah.
Because when you're talking about a very specific case, it's almost like, what are you trying to prove here?
Yeah.
Are you trying to prove it didn't happen? You don't need to do an experiment to determine that. That's proving a negative. That are you trying to, do you know what I mean?
There's literally a line at one point when they're setting up the Jado rocket car myth where Adam says,
So do we have any corroboration of this or any photos or anybody come forward?
Well, that's our job to pursue that.
and I was like, that's not your job.
No, it's not. That's not Mythbusters.
No,
Yeah.
what? And then they don't. They like, that's not really part of the episode.
Not at all.
They do interview some people and we'll talk about that. But in general, no, they test the rocketry and the, more the Mythbusters kind of stuff that you would expect. But yeah, it is weird that it's a very specific, because they did do specific stories. Like I can think of things later on, that came up, the biscuit bazooka, and these were very specific like internet stories and things that came around.
Yeah.
But not that like they were going out and interviewing people who might have witnessed it. Like it was so specific that it was bizarre to see as part of the show. I don't remember that being part of the show.
Me neither.
And I think that was kind of my biggest takeaway was I was surprised at how different the show was from what I remember, while also being blown away of how many iconic moments and like defining elements from the show were there at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just say kicking off a Jado rocket car.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you're Discovery Channel and somebody comes to you with a pilot of a show and you go, what's this about? And you say, we strap rockets on the top of a car and shoot it across the desert. You say, okay, here's all the money that you want. Like it's an amazing idea. It's an amazing first episode in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's just so different.
Yes.
From it didn't feel comfortable in a lot of ways to the Mythbusters that is in my head.
Right.
And so I found myself kind of feeling like, what is this from time to time? It was
did too.
very surprising.
I did too.
And I think it probably speaks to why they put these two myths together. These two myths have almost nothing in common.
That's a great point.
It's found it very weird that they just did one myth completely and then did the second one kind of back to back. I was expecting it to be more like cross cut.
Me too.
Instead,
okay,
it was
so
just
that wasn't just me.
yeah, no,
Okay,
it was
good.
super. I found that super weird, but it kind of makes sense that they do this one myth where the Jado car is big and splashy and cool and it's awesome to see.
Right.
And then you do the Pop Rocks myth, which is much more a binary, could this happen or could it not? I wonder if, I don't imagine, I mean, this is purely a guess. I don't imagine they shot episodes knowing what myths were going to go together, at least at this point. They were probably just shooting stuff and trying to figure it out. And I wonder if when they put the episode together, they said, oh, we need, like the Jado thing is cool, but it's way too loose.
Yeah.
We need something, we need to answer a question, we need to be definitive and put that in. It would be really interesting if anybody knows, or if, if we could talk to one of the creators at some point to find out like how did that come to be? Because you're right. It is, the Jado myth is kind of unsatisfying in a way to me. And we'll get there towards the end, but I kind of came away feeling a little bit unsatisfied, even though it was super cool. Yeah. And I think it's because there, like you said, there was no definitive question being asked or answered in that myth. So as we go into the Jado car myth, one of the first things I noticed about the show is that there's a lot of interviews.
Tons.
There's a lot of interviews with random people who pop up. Arizona Highway Patrol pops up in the episode a couple of times.
Yeah.
Later with Pop Rocks, there's a representative from Pop Rocks,
The vice president.
which is hilarious to me that it's like, oh, you're doing a show about how our ingredient kills people? Let's send our best representative.
Hysterical.
It's so weird.
Hysterical.
But the show is much more documentary in these early episodes. It really, there's like history packages with, old footage of
There's a
various
folklorist.
things. There's a folklorist. I wanted to talk about her.
I don't remember that.
You don't remember her. So
I don't
she was
remember
one of
that at
my
all.
favorite elements early on in the show because it was so different and something that went away.
Yeah.
I looked her up. Her name is Heather Joseph Witham. She is a PhD. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. It might be Whittam. She had several appearances throughout the whole first season. She's still around now. She's a professor of folklore and mythology at Otis College of Art and Design. So she is still around. She is still doing her thing. She didn't end up lasting on the show. Would be interesting. I guess we're going to find out if the show kind of tilted away from the folklore vibes as it went on.
Yeah.
Because I could see, in my memory, Mythbusters is much more of a, STEM show. It's much more of an engineering, mechanics,
with like a dash of Spike TV.
Yeah.
Definitely not
Yeah.
a lot of it, but a little bit of a I like watching things blow up.
Exactly. Yeah. And it has much more of that vibe, whereas this episode especially felt very kind of like it almost felt like one of those History Channel, like verging on Ancient Aliens
Yes.
kind of thing, where it was like, oh yeah, we're going to get some spooky ooky stuff into this. And a little bit more esoteric, which I assume, I don't remember, but I assume that goes away by season 2.
I
And
think so,
that's
too.
probably why she didn't stick with the show, is it was just a different thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just interesting to see how all of that came together over the course of the show. It was very haphazard at times.
Yeah.
It told the story pretty well. Like, it didn't lose me, but it was very jarring to see all these different faces who are not a regular part of the show in my memory popping up and talking and, coming in and giving information along the way. Like you were saying about the Jado myth, just the having the highway patrol, the trooper talking about it almost as if he was like, yeah, I took the police report. I was like, oh wait, that's confirmed then. Like, that was my first thought.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
I thought, because in the way that it was framed, the implication was that he was the one that found the wreckage.
He's the guy.
Like, that is, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that means it wasn't just me. It was how it was framed that implied. And
Totally.
Then like, I don't know, maybe halfway through the myth, they're like, by the way, there's never been a record of this. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, so
Then
it's
why are you here?
disproven. I don't have to disprove this. It's a negative.
I know. Yeah.
Ooh.
Very strange.
Yeah.
But as they got into the myth, it was also interesting how I feel like in later years, the show would be, I feel like in again, I could be completely wrong. It's just my memory could be lying to me, but I feel like in later years, the conflict of the episode would have been, we've got to get a rocket. Then we've got to test the rocket and show how many foot-pounds of force it puts out.
Yes.
And then we've got to, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The conflict in this episode was them on the phone calling around looking for cars and rockets.
Let's see. I wrote in my notes a lot of emphasis on process of acquiring materials.
Exactly.
I totally agree. Like, that was, I remember a lot more infographics.
Yeah.
And like predictions.
Yeah. What's going to happen? What do we think this is going to be?
Yeah.
Really breaking each element of the myth down into steps, into beats, and analyzing each beat and really going through it. I mean, I will say, I kind of liked the admin montages of looking for stuff, because
did too.
In later years, that was always a question of mine of like, how do you get 100,000 ping pong balls?
Yes.
Like, how does that work? You know, or how do you get all these explosives that you get?
Yeah.
And that was somewhat answered by one of my favorite scenes in the entire episode is Jamie on the phone with the Air Force. This absolutely killed me because, I mean, I think logically that has to happen. Like, at some point, somebody has to call the military and go, we want to shoot off a Jado rocket. Can we do this? Can you help us? Here's what we're trying to do.
Yes.
But to actually see it on camera was spectacular. And I pulled a clip because Jamie is talking to this woman who is trying so hard to be nice, but you can tell that her internal monologue is, what the hell is this crazy man saying to me?
Just so it's clear, we're not trying to get a hold of one of these things and do whatever we want with it. We want you involved.
Okay.
I love the, okay. She's just so polite and just like, yeah, sure. Yeah, this is normal. This happens every Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I love you, Jamie. If strapping a rocket to the roof of a vehicle is not the very definition of doing whatever we want with a thing, I think we need to rewrite some definitions. That is but that's this is another, what I love about this, what I find delicious about this is that it is existing in a pre-Mythbusters world.
Right.
They don't know what Mythbusters is.
No.
They don't know that he's not just some crazy guy. So like to them, we're in later years. He's
It would be like if
hey,
you or
Jamie
I,
exactly.
If you or I called the military and said, can we use a
Can
rocket?
we have a rocket?
Please.
Don't worry, we want you to be involved. I'm not sure that as the military, that would make me more secure, I think.
I feel like if I was the military, it'd almost be like, we don't want to be involved. Like, we'll give you a rocket and don't tell anybody where you got it.
It fell off the back of a truck, man. You can't tie this back to us. That's not...
I loved it. It was so funny. And then they continue this with the car, actually going into details of going junkyard to junkyard and crawling place to place with some amazing characters.
Some just delightful characters.
Yes, who all seem to know the myth, by the way. That was another
every single
interesting,
one of
and
them.
that was another thing that made me think, oh, this is a specific story, because they're all going, oh yeah, and one guy even knew which car it was going to be.
And that is where I think, and again, we talked about this before we even, committed to recording. I can name off the top of my head probably two television series in the entire history of television where I think the first season is the best one. It's almost never the case. You're cutting your teeth. You're hitting your stride. You're figuring it out. There's so many growing pains in season one. And I feel like a strong one here is trying to thread the needle between it being like investigative journalism or is this a science show?
Right.
And it hasn't quite figured out what it wants to be on that front. So it doesn't fully satisfy either.
Yeah.
And trying to appeal to both, we don't get any sort of... I was super interested this entire time in why all those people knew this same legend.
Right.
What's the kernel? I'm not saying that had to have happened, but I am interested. I would be interested in someone that's very good at research, finding out this is the first recorded instance of the,
well, it's almost like
that.
there's two shows. It's almost like there's two shows there. There's the history of this weird thing and this weird modern folklore, modern mythology kind of thing, which they were clearly trying to do, even all the way down to the name, obviously. Right. And then there is the make stuff go fast, blow up part of the show. And I feel like in the end, they leaned more towards that latter half and found a way to tell stories scientifically, which is also smart and strong from let me say this. I think Mythbusters sometimes gets a bad rap as people remember the explosions and go, that's the show where they blew everything up. The reason that all those imitators didn't work is because Mythbusters told incredible stories.
Yes.
As a television show, as a structured piece of narrative, it was impeccable, and they used the explosions to get you in.
Yeah.
This episode almost didn't have that to me. Yeah. This episode was more about, like you said, stick around, because at the end of this episode, we're strapping rockets to a car, and you really want to see that because you've never seen it before. Yeah. Which, again, in a world without Mythbusters, totally works. Yeah. You totally would have me tuning in. These days, I feel like I can see that on YouTube.
Yeah.
It wouldn't necessarily work. And I think over the course of the show, they learned that, and they got their narrative to a place where they didn't have to rely just on the explosions. And I remember episodes where the thing doesn't blow up.
Yeah.
Where stuff doesn't work. And they, by that point, had their storytelling at a place where that didn't matter. But in these early stages, they're literally relying on junkyard montage to tell the story, and it's super weird.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it just feels like that could be a different show. While we're still in the junkyards, though, there was another clip that made me laugh really hard, and I wanted to play. When they finally find the Chevy Impala, because they go through multiple cars, and again, it's a very intense montage of like, is it going to be a Thunderbird?
Yeah.
Or is it gonna, it's a very strange kind of. It's funny, but it's just a strange kind of way to tell the story. But when they finally find their Impala, which has hydraulics, which was hilarious. I loved seeing the lowrider bouncing Chevy Impala.
Sold by like a 70-year-old white couple, no less.
And with the two geekiest guys you've ever seen driving
Yes.
a souped up Chevy Impala. But when they're pulling out of the lot where they bought it to like test the car, they're test driving the car, they like scratch the brakes for a second because like, I don't know, something happened. And you can hear Adam in the passenger seat be like, oh, and then Jamie says something that absolutely cracked me up.
Oh, whoa.
I got it, lady.
I got it, lady. Oh man, that's the other thing.
Confidence.
One of the legendary parts of the show, one of the first things I think people think of with Mythbusters is the relationship between Adam and Jamie.
Yes.
It's something that's been talked about. I think there are many myths about their relationship. You often hear, like, when I've brought the show up to multiple people, like people we told we were doing the podcast or whatever, and people would always go, you know, those guys hated each other, right? And my response is always, no, they did. You know, they put each other's lives in their hands every day for 13 seasons.
Yeah.
You don't do that with someone you hate. They've been very open about, we weren't friends, we're different people, we didn't hang out afterwards, we often frustrated each other, but like we wanted the other guy there holding our safety cord.
Yeah.
And like you see that, I don't think they could have the rapport that you see over the course of the show, even back to this first episode, truly hating each other. What you see is two very different humans forced to interact on camera, which is funny.
Yeah.
It works. It's great.
Yeah. That's where a lot of the humor comes from is just their interactions and like Jamie's straight man to Adam's ridiculousness.
And I think it was a combination of that moment with Adam and Jamie messing with each other into the montage of them stripping out the car and starting to work on it. That was the first thing in this episode that felt like Mythbusters to me.
Agreed. Totally.
It was the first time where I was like, I'm home.
To the point where, and I'm so sorry if you're listening, I kind of forgot what Adam did. You know, like I kind of that's right. You're the muscle. You're the handyman that knows how to like put all this stuff together. Like Jamie is Jamie does, I guess, more of the like blueprints and the like knows how to put but I mean, I feel like
we
Adam
see him
does
with
a
like the
lot of
robotic or the radio control car later on. Like that's very Jamie's wheelhouse.
Yes.
It is interesting to what we're talking about with this show. Jamie and Adam are also both finding their roles. You can really, you can really feel that they are trying to figure out what is our role in the show and what is our role with each other. Like, how does this, you know, Adam is obviously the Jamie antagonist to a bit in a fun way. Like he clearly enjoys and knows that there's comedy in Jamie's the straight man. And so he can just bounce off of him. Yeah. And you see that here. I think it's going to grow. I think it's going to become a lot more as the show goes on. But you see that even all the way back at the very beginning of them bouncing off of each other. I thought a note that I made was, on the whole, I thought those two guys together were fantastic in this episode.
I agree.
It's not easy to do what they were doing. The segments that they were doing where they would talk about the myth, and it's clearly like they've already done it and now they're having to come back and talk about it as if they haven't done it yet. Yeah. That is really hard to do. That's especially if you're not like a polished broadcaster, which neither of them were before the show. It's really, really tough. And it feels a little awkward in the episode. You can definitely tell that like this is set up. Yeah. But on the whole, I thought they did a great job considering how little on-camera experience I think both of those guys had before the show started.
I totally agree.
One of the greatest moments, one of the greatest recurring characters I thought on this episode that completely took me by surprise was the person who was referred to as racing legend. And I hope I say this correctly, Andy Granatelli, who pops up out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
They're just like montage working on the car, talking about like the lake bed where they're going to go shoot it off. And all of a sudden, this dude just pops up sitting behind a desk. He looks like he just needed a cigar. Like he should have been
Probably had one.
like cutting a cigar at the desk. And he just starts talking about racing. I looked this man up.
Okay.
He is not a racer himself. He was apparently a businessman in the racing industry. He did a lot of stuff. He owned racing teams, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
He did win, or his team won their first Indy 500 in 1969 with Mario Andretti. And unfortunately, Andy Granatelli passed away in 2013, but he was 90 years old. So he had quite the life, went down in history as a major racing figure.
Yeah.
I don't know that his Mythbusters appearance is really the pinnacle of his career.
I wouldn't say so. But then again, Cliff, you can't tell me what happened on his Mythbusters appearance. Nobody can. I challenge you, listener, right now. Cliff, could you cue this one up?
Yeah, is it from when we first started talking?
Mm-hmm. Listener, tell me what this man says, please.
At 350 miles an hour Chevrolet Impala, all the windows will pop out of it and the roof will pull off.
I get to the windows would fall out of it, and I kind of lose track. And I just love. He's so laid back and matter of fact about it too. Just like, yeah, it's not gonna work.
No, he is. This man is melting into a leather chair, just like very much like you guys are idiots. There ain't no way this is gonna. But his explanation.
Why are you in my office asking me about this right now?
Of course, this isn't gonna work. Now I tried it with 8 and it did work, but you like find that out later that he did, which is why it's so funny that he's initially very dismissive of
and
this
also,
idea.
why not only is he dismissive of the idea, but also it's so weird that he just pops up and you don't know who this guy is, and you're like, why are they asking him? They don't set the stage with like he tried it. You don't learn, like you said, you don't learn that until much later on in the episode.
Yeah.
So I had no clue why we were talking to this guy.
No, and on top of that, I don't know if this is what do you call it, lingo or parlance of racing that I'm not familiar with, but they do introduce, or a typo, they do introduce him as like his little epithet at the bottom says auto racing legenda. I don't.
That's how it's spelled in Australia. That's the Australian production company.
That's how they do it down under, is it? That's a legenda if I've ever seen one.
Oh no, that's gonna become a thing.
Welcome back, legendas. I don't know. I just was like, I had to pause it for a few reasons. It was because I was writing something when I heard that audio clip, and I was like, oh no, one more time, please. I had no idea what you just said.
There is another moment from this same part in the episode that I loved, which is, like we said, Jamie Hyneman is known for being a bit of an emotional robot. Yeah. And we see
part
that
of his charm.
We see that later on in the episode. But there is this moment that is so wonderful, and I don't have a word for it other than adorable, which is Jamie's working on the car and they're like getting everything figured out. They keep setting the car on fire. It's like this whole thing. And then he just starts talking to Adam about being so excited about what they're doing. And he just sounds like a little kid.
I can't wait to set this thing off. I'm going to be in a helicopter, and I've never ridden a helicopter before, radio controlling a 3,000 horsepower rocket-driven radio-controlled car.
Doesn't he sound like a little kid who's like about to go to Disney for the first time? And he's like, I'm going to get in a helicopter. I've never been on a helicopter before. And then I'm going to go to this and I'm going to see Mickey and I'm going to get a churro. And
it really does. And it also comes off with like an air of like, I just sold this show.
Yes, I'm getting paid to do this.
Yes, like they are paying me money to make a remote control rocket car that I'm going to watch from a helicopter, and that's my job right now. So that's great.
It's also kind of adorable given now in a post-Mythbusters world, we know the crazy things they would get to do. That At this stage of the show, Jamie's just excited about the helicopter.
Oh, like, yeah, exactly.
He's just thrilled about, I'm going to get to go in the whirlybird.
Yeah.
Like, it's so cool.
it's pure.
You want to pop in and be like, Jamie, if you only knew
Yeah.
where this is going to go and the wild things you were going to do on the show. So they go to a break, and when they come back, we're in the desert finally with the rocket car. We're actually in the moment. They're actually starting to go. And they kept talking about something in the episode that I kept writing down as like, ooh, is this foreshadowing? Is this foreshadowing?
Mm-hmm.
They kept talking about how the radio control might fail.
Yes.
They kept talking about the range of the radio control. And I remember that happens at some point in the show.
Yeah.
Where maybe more than once, where the radio control fails and a car goes haywire. And I couldn't remember if it was here. And so I kept writing down foreshadowing. Oh, doesn't happen. Nope. It doesn't happen at all. But I did love in the early part, and this is so a part of Mythbusters, I think, and kind of the failure is always an option thing. In the very first test, Jamie is like furious that nothing goes wrong.
Yes.
He's just like, if nothing goes wrong now, something's going to go wrong when we actually do this.
Yeah.
Which is the right way to be. It shows you how those guys think and that they were the right people for this job. Because I would have been ecstatic. Oh, good. I hope nothing goes wrong. But he has that mindset of like, no. Let's do a little problem so that the big problems don't work. And I did find, because I didn't remember what happened, I found it genuinely tense.
Yeah.
Like I found it really tense as they're starting to build this up. The episode has been kind of we're out, we're looking for cars and we're talking to junkyard guys. This is where it started to ratchet up a little bit to me. And again, felt more Mythbusters. It felt like, oh, there's something very dangerous that could go haywire. There's a lot of stuff. They're out in the desert. We get helicopters, all this kind of stuff. It started to feel like the show. It really started to feel like, oh, wow, what's going to happen? Is this going to get pulled off or not? To me, this started to make it worthwhile, even though it was still a little bit loose.
Yeah. And it definitely built because there's the like misfire.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Which I loved.
I loved it too.
I love that a rocket car gets stopped by a clogged fuel filter.
But it's just great. It's
a
like
rocket car.
It's like getting Al Capone for tax evasion. They're like, that's really not what I thought was going to sink this operation. But all right. I also really, really, really like that they have another like former NASA guy.
Oh my God, I love. So did you notice his lower third? His nameplate, it is the best lower third of all time. I wrote it down. It is retired rocket scientist.
I did notice that.
I aspire to that in my life.
And I'll send you the screen grab, because it's just like, you always hear, well, it's not rocket science, or and then you look at a rocket scientist and he's just like, yeah, well, see what we got going on here.
And he's so convinced it's not going to work.
Oh my God.
He's like, that's not straight. That's not working. That's not going to work.
It's amazing. I mean, he takes them to the cleaners. Like he just absolutely, he's like, hey, if you fix that, well, it still probably won't work, but it'll be closer.
Well, and because they also didn't really introduce this guy, he just like appears in the desert. I wanted to believe that he had just showed up, and Adam and Jamie are like, "What the hell? We're just making a TV show, and a rocket scientist shows up."
No, I do think it's got to be a bit of a Hoosier situation. Clearly, he is the ghost of a. By retired, they mean from life. He's the ghost of a rocket scientist that came back to be like, y'all trying nonsense in this desert again? Last time we got a nuclear age out of this, and you might want to be careful.
You moved the cars, but you didn't move the bodies.
I hope it works. I mean, because I don't want you to dig up my lake bed.
It was absolutely as thrilling as you expect when the car finally goes off and it launches down the desert. It makes the most terrifying sound. It's
awesome.
Those rockets all firing at the same time was horrifying.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I cannot imagine what it must have felt like to be there. It's one of those moments. Again, it comes back to like, despite anything that we're saying about the weirdness of this episode, which I think a lot of it is hindsight, which is probably not fair, but that's how we're looking at the show. But when you see a moment like this, you're like, right, this show was always going to work. Because it's just so, where else are you going to see this? Especially 2003. Again, this didn't exist, and it's so cool.
It's 2 decades on, and I still like laughed like a lunatic just because, I mean, when they punch it, it looks like a cartoon, man.
Yes,
It looks like
yes.
The Incredibles, like the way it just zips across.
I was waiting to see the Roadrunner running really fast next to the car. It's so cool. I noticed that afterwards, there was actually a really nice moment afterwards where the helicopter lands and Jamie gets out and Jamie and Adam like high five
Yeah.
and have a really nice moment together at the end. And Jamie looks drunk.
Yeah.
He's so happy
Yeah.
that this all went off. Because, you know, the stress had to be insane. They've never done this before. They're making this show. Like, it's got to be nuts going into this. And they look so happy when this is over. It was a really nice moment to cap off the episode, or cap off the myth, at least, to see those guys together.
I agree.
But did you notice what doesn't happen?
They don't say what they like. There's no conclusion.
Exactly.
Like,
they don't say busted.
Yeah.
They don't say busted.
That was the main thing I remember. About
They
the
literally just cut to Jamie going, didn't happen.
show. Yeah.
Which we need to talk about that result.
Thank you.
As being, I think it's one of the things that at times was somewhat contentious about Mythbusters. I remember watching Mythbusters with friends and family as a kid, and as much as we all love the show, people would often argue over the result. And oftentimes the argument was this exact situation, which is you've just seen them apparently do the thing,
Right.
and then and yet they say it's busted. But it's because they have very specific parameters and a structure to the myth that in this episode was not clearly established.
Boom.
And made it really kind of flat when you've just seen the car take off across the desert and holy crap, it works.
Yeah.
And then they go, yeah, that couldn't happen.
Look. I wrote in my notes, holy bleep, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Like that was the conclusion I drew. Is I was like, this is not possible.
Right.
They just showed me it was possible. And they're like, yeah, it didn't happen how they said it happened. I was like, okay. I was just unclear on what we were testing for.
Right.
Like that's where the discrepancy was.
I had to go back and look at the confines of the myth that the car got up to 300 miles an hour.
Exactly.
They topped out somewhere around 140, maybe a little bit above.
That it had liftoff.
That it got liftoff.
Yes,
now
yes.
that was a thing that did, even with, because I understand in the confines of the myth why they said that it couldn't happen, because of looking at the speed and the level of speed and rocketry that it would take to get there, and the car would come apart. They barely pulled it off with what they had, much less if you had more powerful rockets and yada yada. I understand all that. I don't like the way it was presented. I think is more the what makes it feel this way. I think it's less that they were wrong and more just the way it was presented in the episode was weird. The one thing I didn't understand or that confused me was they talked about, they brought it back up here, this part, that part of the original myth was that the car hit a curb and went airborne. They didn't test for that.
Not even kind of.
I definitely feel like later on in the show, that would have been part of it.
Yes.
Right?
Or it would have been, or I really, really, really remember in episodes, if they get an answer quickly, being like, let's test with another variable.
Yep.
You know, and like tweaking and adjusting.
Well, they do that with the Pop Rocks myth. They don't get the result, so then they replicate the result.
Man, you're right. It really is like
it's like they figured it out while making this episode.
I think they did.
Yeah.
Because like it doesn't the car one is not a good, except watching it, you know, go to ludicrous speed, which again is awesome. Check it. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's just, there's something, it just, it speaks to that kid in you, you know, that's just like superhero stuff. Yeah. Like Batman can hit something in his car and go,
yeah.
Like, I mean, because it's going unreasonably fast as well,
It's
which
total
is just so
Acme
funny.
Hour insanity. It's great.
It is. I love it. But everything around that is very, very not what we're used to in Mythbusters. And even something that was really kind of bothering me about the setup for this one is that they were asked to prove a negative.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't, that's not how that works.
Right.
We don't have to prove a negative.
Right.
Like, I get why that's important. And the folklore gets into this, where especially in the second myth, where she says it's incredibly hard to change a public perception once it's taken root, regardless of the veracity of that statement.
And to that point, it kind of feels like the episode up until this point supports the public perception of the story until they then go, nah, it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just like, again, if you had more parameters about what you would consider to be plausible, or had even told me what we are trying to attain here as a level of plausibility.
It's like a rubric.
For this.
We needed a rubric for
Exactly.
what this was going to be graded against, and we didn't have that. And so that's why I think it feels the way that it does.
And if I'm not mistaken, later in the show, it even has infographics.
Oh yeah,
that show you exactly what they are testing for.
Well,
and like
even down to the blueprints, which we see in this episode early on. Those become, again, I keep coming back to my faulty memory here, but if I remember, those become a big part of the storytelling of the show.
I think you're
to
right.
clearly visually lay out, here's what we're trying to do. Not just a plan, but literally like putting an image in your head of what a result may look like early on. At this point, they're very loose. Adam and Jamie are still drawing them at this point. Like they're very, very just kind of loose, and like they're introducing, they're used as a little storytelling device, but it's not nearly what it would be. So I think, they definitely, it's cool. I feel like it could sound like we're being negative about this, but the truth is we're watching a show figure itself out.
Yeah.
And there is something really cool about that, and cool even within this episode of seeing what worked, what didn't, and how they kind of adjust as it goes on.
Yeah.
I want to propose, we actually didn't talk about this before we recorded, but I think we should do the absolute worst thing we can do, which is at the end of each myth, give our armchair quarterback verdicts over what we think, whether we think they busted it or not.
Okay.
Because in these early episodes, they don't even say it. So I feel like we need to come to some sort of result.
I would love to.
Personally, I think in this one, I do think it's busted within the structure of the myth. Mm-hmm. It's just that the episode didn't set that up. Mm-hmm. So I think it is busted, but barely.
I agree. I think that it is busted, but not by anything they've done.
Yeah.
It's busted because there's no corroborating evidence to suggest it ever happened.
It's busted because it didn't happen.
It's busted, right. It's busted because we don't have a single eyewitness. We don't have anything. We don't have any wreckage. It's busted because I have no reason to believe it in the first place other than it sounding cool.
Right.
Now, on the other point of, is it possible to strap rockets to a car and go very, very fast without it ending in death and disaster?
Yeah.
Which is also kind of what they were testing for.
Yeah.
That's plausible.
Yeah.
That's plausible.
I mean, that would become a show called Mythbusters.
Right you are. Right you are.
Which strapping rockets and bombs onto stuff and living to tell the tale would kind of become the theme of the show.
I was quite impressed. I was hoping it would go good, and it did. You know, a little apprehensible, but no. Jamie did his homework.
But we're not done. There's a second myth in this episode. And before we got to this myth, it was one of the greatest moments ever in the show that I did not remember, which is their ad break, their jump coming out of the ad. They have these throughout the episode. They've been doing these little "don't try this at home," we're experts, yada yada. Different people do it at different times. I'm gonna let you set the scene for what we see coming out of the ad before the second myth is introduced.
Okay, so we've got the only person that has so far done one of these throw to ad breaks for some reason was the cop that they introduced. It was like, I'm, deputy whoever, and you're watching Mythbusters. Okay. This one, we get Jamie coming at us on a scooter. I believe it's a scooter.
It is a pair of roller skates that are powered by power drills.
Okay, even better, even better. And he is just kind of coming at the camera, about to tell us something before he zooms by.
Full robot mode.
Full robot mode.
He's not even looking at the camera because he's clearly trying to figure out where he's going.
Right.
And he's like, so he's completely stiff and he's just going like,
I'm Jamie Hyneman. You're watching Mythbusters.
and it's just a total going right past the camera, looks so uncomfortable, and then falls. And immediately
then
wipes
just
out.
Eats it, and they kept it.
Oh, I'm so glad they kept it. Oh, so good.
I
He
really
even
am
says,
too.
I hope you cut that out, which is a surefire way to ensure
that something stays in.
Absolutely.
Every single time.
every single time.
No, but it is such a funny, because it's also, I think part of the reason why it's delivered in such a deadpan manner, that's just kind of the way he speaks, but
Yeah.
he's also, like you were saying, focusing, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So like he's trying to get the line out while also trying not to fall down.
Priceless.
You can't
Absolutely.
do both. You can't do both.
If you're listening to this and you haven't gone back to rewatch the episode and you only have a minute, go back, find this moment. It is towards the latter half of the episode and watch it, because it is
Beautiful.
Again, it's one of those things that makes you fall in love with these guys who are these weird
Goofballs.
these weird, incredibly brilliant goofballs behind the show. It's just one of the great things about it.
It's very endearing.
Myth 2, Pop Rocks and Soda. So this is a classic. This is something I remember growing up. I've heard this. I mean, to this day, I feel like you hear about this from time to time.
Yep.
If you ingest 6 packs of Pop Rocks and a 6-pack of soda, it's a lethal combination that will burst your stomach, is the essential myth. Can you die from eating Pop Rocks and soda? Which completely makes sense in a kind of passing way. People understand that it's going to make gas in your stomach. The gas is going to expand. Could you rupture your stomach? It's one of those great, like, pre-social media, little myth conspiracy kind of things.
A playground myth.
It's almost on par with, like, if you keep making a face, it's going to stick that way. Or if you swallow gum, or if you whatever. But this one's better in, I think, how you can test it. And so it really worked. To me, this felt so Mythbusters. Like, this immediately felt like home. This felt like the show. There's a couple of things that were interesting that they kind of teed up and didn't come back to, which we'll talk about. But in general, I thought this was great. I did have a memory of, I feel like now it's entered the lexicon of, like, Mythbusters did this. And so, of course, we know it's not going to work. But what did you think going in? Were you aware of that?
No. I just said no because I didn't think that it would be able to produce enough gas.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that just, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like, yes, I get that they put out a lot of irresponsible products for children, but this one just doesn't, like, I've had Pop Rocks, you know? And I don't recall, and I feel like it would have been part of the legend that, like, oh, they had to totally change it, and that's the Pop Rocks that we have now. Where, like, I've never heard that as a part of it. It's just like, oh, this thing is on the market, and it has killed someone, and everybody knows it apparently, but it's still there and fine.
Don't you miss when that was conspiracy theories?
Oh God, yeah, a lot.
Doesn't that feel great? I would love for Pop Rocks and soda to be the conspiracies that we're dealing with.
Why? And I would more so, I would love for the conspiracy theories to lead to less happenings in Washington, D.C. generally, whether they be at capitals or pizza parlors. Just if your conspiracy theory requires you to go to Washington for some reason, I'm out. I'm out.
See, we're kidding, but now Pop Rocks are going to end up in QAnon somehow.
Oh, God.
And it's going to be our fault.
Probably.
They talked about this briefly, but I did a little bit more research that apparently this myth comes from somehow the actor, his name was John Gilchrist, who played Little Mikey on the Life cereal ads. You know, Mikey, I think he likes it, which I think of as a line from The Matrix, but to the olds,
Same.
is going to be the old Life cereal ads from like the 70s and on. And the rumor was that in his teenage years, he died and left public life. That is why nobody saw him out on the cereal commercials anymore, because he died from consuming too much Pop Rocks and soda.
What?
Yeah.
How did they connect those dots?
I guess it's because, so here's the cool thing about him. He's actually had a very successful filmmaking career as crew. So he works as a grip. So that is someone who works.
He's still alive?
He's still around. And apparently he is still working. He had credits to dating as recently as a few years ago.
Well, I think this thing is busted.
Right. Yeah, that should have been the episode. It's just he pops up at the end.
Well, no, he's still alive. So
yeah, no,
go home.
Credits.
No,
but yeah, he's worked as a grip on films, including, these were the two I wrote down because I can't imagine two different films to work on.
Okay.
Speed 2, Cruise Control,
Fantastic,
and The Notebook.
Okay.
But I would assume he left public life because he wasn't an actor anymore. He was working behind the scenes, has had a very successful career, but this is how things get started. People thought that he died from Pop Rocks, which is wild.
And also, like, pre-internet, like, it makes a little more sense with the internet,
Right?
How this stuff can just like spread like wildfire. That makes sense to me. In a pre-internet world, that or at least in a world that was not regularly using things like forums and online chat, stuff like that. How do these like myths get started? How do they spread?
It is
to
interesting.
Every playground across the country.
I think you're hitting on something there that is interesting. Talking about that, what made Mythbusters work is, especially in these early episodes, they really leaned into those kinds of myths. Even, we talked about, like, with the Jado car, how that was kind of a loose story, but even the Pop Rocks and Soda thing, which I think is a lot more concise, is still very much one of those, it's fun to believe that this could happen.
That's fair.
And why
That's fair.
do we feel that way is kind of one of the things I think the show, it's a question the show was asking indirectly of, this is fun to think about these things. And it's fun to take them seriously and explore them. And in the case of Mythbusters, they busted those things. They show why they couldn't happen, but I don't feel like it took the fun out of it, which is interesting. Like a lot of the times if you believe in something that's fantasy or you believe in something, if that thing gets challenged, you respond to that negatively. With Mythbusters, they challenged everything directly, but it was still fun. Which is just such a, I mean, that's a testament to the show and the attitude they have with the show and the attitude that the show, even in this early episode, I feel like has is knowledge can be just as fun as the myth. The knowledge of what would actually happen and why can be just as fun as the crazy thing that maybe you want to believe, even though some part of you knows it's not actually possible. That's really special. You don't get that on a lot of TV shows. You don't get that from early 2000s Discovery Channel reality shows.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And the fact that they were able to synthesize so brilliantly that educational aspect with the entertainment. I mean, that's really strong.
Exactly. And I felt like they hit that balance really well in this myth.
In the second one.
There was actually a moment where they talk about, and they didn't really come back to this directly, although it is in the episode, or it is there in the testing, but they even say, okay, we need to test how much pressure a stomach can stand and how much gas is created by Pop Rocks. And they start to lay out this kind of like we were saying before, those individual steps. They don't go into them that much. They don't like do a test and see how much gas the Pop Rocks create or something like that. But they do things like the PSI gauge, and they start talking about that. They bring in a doctor who's talking about stuff. He actually felt way more appropriate to me than a lot of the people who popped up in the Jado myth.
I agree.
Because again, they were really going into the science.
They were experts.
They were experts who were going into the science of why this could or couldn't work. And you were learning it with them throughout this myth. I felt like it worked so much better and felt so Mythbusters, even down to things like they put the pig stomach, which is another phone montage, by the way. We got back to, we're on the phone trying to find weird props. Going to be interesting to see how long that sticks around in the show. It's happened a lot already in the first episode. It's like the third one. But they take the pig stomach and they put it in a skeleton, and they make this crazy contraption that is holding it with the gas tubes and all this kind of stuff.
Pretty terrifying.
Yeah, completely terrifying. Felt very Mythbusters. A little bit of an early early kind of clue to Buster, who will become a big character on the show. He's not here yet. He's not on this episode, but we do get kind of the human analog thing.
It's proto-Buster.
But it's almost like a proto-Buster. Like we want it to look human. We want you to understand the human part of this and have that in the storytelling. I skipped over this, and I don't want to forget to go back to when they were looking for the pig stomach. And they find out that the FDA has listed pig esophagus and bowels as a hazardous substance. I just wrote down, what the bleep are people doing with pig intestine that the FDA has to specifically put it on a blacklist?
Well, I don't know. But I don't want to ask.
Yeah, I don't either. They then go to something I wrote down as the pig parts drug deal. which is where they go to get the pig stomach and have to blur the guy's face.
Yes.
This is the creepiest scene.
I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this a lot because it was 5 seconds prior that we had established it's illegal to have this.
You can't have it. It's illegal.
I'm like, all right, got it. There's a hurdle here. No, sir. We found a guy. And then they just walk in to like this giant meat factory and this dude just kind of like sidles off the like main floor.
Face blurred.
Face blurred, hands them just like a paper bag, a dripping paper bag.
They should have had like a voice synthesizer thing, like he was going to do a ransom note. Like,
here's your pig stomach, man.
Like, what the hell? It was so weird.
And then Adam checks it like it's a McDonald's meal.
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's see. We got 3 pigs and a stuff. Okay, everything's intact.
The montage of them inflating the stomach with a straw is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life.
Because now, if you're asking me, how are we going to do this? Okay.
Yeah.
Bike tire pump.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Come on.
Something that, in the very least, moves your mouth as far away as possible.
Far away from a pig anus as can be imagined.
From a substance the FDA has made hazardous.
Rightly.
Is illegal.
You have to do a drug deal to acquire
You
it.
have to do a drug deal with a blurred face man in order to get this. Let's put your mouth a McDonald's straw length away from this thing. It's what it was. It was like the overly thick McDonald's straw.
He blows it up with his mouth.
It might as well have been a McFlurry spoon they're sticking in this thing.
He blows up a stomach like a balloon with a straw. Now, Cliff, have you ever blown up a balloon?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask if I ever blown up a pig's stomach. No, I have blown up a balloon.
Okay, you have blown up a balloon. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes when blowing up a balloon, a little bit of that air can get back in you, but it's fine because it's your air.
Yeah, and also, you get a little bit of that rubbery taste that comes back. Like, this has been in a balloon.
Exactly, man. Exactly. So, okay, this is a pig's stomach. You're basically air backwashing a pig's stomach.
There were a lot of, I would say, delightfully odd decisions made during this entire process. Mm-hmm. One is inflating the pig stomach with a McDonald's straw. Mm-hmm. The other is they are repeatedly, over and over again, pouring cans of what is clearly, to begin with, Coca-Cola. You can see the red can through the blur. Really? Did I get it wrong?
The first time.
Yeah,
they run 2 experiments.
Exactly. So I have that down too.
Good.
Both time you see cans of soda, they are blurred, which also says nobody thought about that when they were doing this.
Correct.
You can very simply, in the film industry, it's called Greeking. You put a piece of tape over the logo on the can so that you do not have to have some poor editor in Australia who is working all night to go in and individually blur soda cans, which is probably why he got the lower third wrong on the other guy. He was so tired by the time the soda can job was done.
Right.
But they're very clearly, you can see the red color through the blur.
It is a Coca-Cola classic.
100%.
I would stake my life on it.
I also noticed in this section, this is one of the first times, it's in the background a couple of times, but this is one of the first times in the show you can somewhat clearly see the wall of boxes in M5 that later become kind of an infamous visual part of the show. They're all these individual
it's like Batman's Batcave
exactly.
of the trophies.
And there's these individual boxes that all have white sheets of paper on the end with big black lettering of what's in them. I paused and tried as best I could to read as many as possible.
Yeah.
It's in SD. Still, it's, old school. It's very hard to read, especially if it's out of focus. So I didn't get a lot of them. I want to keep track of this as the show goes on.
Okay.
Because I remember there being some weird things written on these boxes. On this episode, all I could see, there was a bunch of boxes labeled fabric. Makes sense. It was all different types of fabric. Leg gear was one, which I assume I'm going to have to believe is like knee pads, not like robot legs.
Okay.
Even though I want to believe it's robot legs.
Yeah, I was thinking about like pogo sticks on each foot, but
I wouldn't put it past them.
Well,
climbing harness was one, which I thought, okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
My favorite though did just say shields and helmets.
Okay, well, You got to know where those are.
You got to know when you need your shields and helmets.
I know.
You got to go to the box. And it's like weirdly high up for armor, by the way.
Yeah,
It'd be
yeah.
very difficult to get that down. But I want to keep track of these boxes throughout the show because I feel like a lot of weird things show up on these innocuous looking bins as the show goes on.
Okay.
And it becomes, in my memory, it's a character. So I want to
Yes.
keep track of it. The first test of the very clearly Coke and soda, unsurprisingly, does not break the stomach.
Well, it hardly even produces gas at all.
Yeah, it doesn't even show up on the gauge.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, I will say, I expected it to show up on the gauge.
I did too.
I thought there would be more than there was. Even when they ultimately, recreate the result, it's still not nearly as much pressure as I expected. And maybe I have, crazy tests in my head of seeing those PSI gauges. They will later like max them out on
Yeah,
various tests.
yeah,
But
yeah.
here at the very, I really thought there would be more than there was, but it didn't do anything. I mean, kudos to the human body for, I guess, being designed to deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it really didn't have any effect at all. But this is the moment, though, that again becomes very Mythbusters-y, where
Yes.
they now replicate the result. They're now
Yes.
going to do whatever it takes to blow up the stomach. And what's terrifying is they go, oh yeah, pop rocks, don't worry about it. And so you're expecting, oh, they're going to use some like industrial equipment, or they're going
Yeah,
to do something
yeah,
crazy to blow it
yeah,
up. No,
exactly.
home baking soda.
Yes, sir.
Just a lot of home baking soda ends up being the thing that can rupture your stomach.
They're doing the classic middle school volcano experiment in a
Yes.
pig stomach is
Yes.
what they're doing.
And when they're doing it, Adam is even, and no, maybe this is a thing that people do actually take baking soda for like heartburn and indigestion.
Oh, that was wild to me. I had never once heard that.
Same. Adam's like, I've done more than that.
Yeah.
And then it's not, I think they do like a normal amount or like a heavy dose, and then they add 2 more and the stomach explodes.
Yeah.
Which to me is much more of the story here. Not that Pop Rocks won't blow up your stomach. Baking soda will kill you.
Baking soda will blow up your stomach.
It will explode you from the inside out.
Now, let's see. Did I know this? On the top of my head, no.
Yeah.
However, I recall there was always some baking soda in my fridge growing up.
Yeah. Yep.
It has been explained to me, but I don't know why. But they told me, and I believed for a long, long time, like into college, that baking soda was poisonous. Because that's just what they told me to get me to not take it. Like in hindsight, I'm now putting the pieces together and it's like, okay, this could have blown up my stomach.
Yeah.
Well, they could have told me that, but there's something that we neglected about that second experiment.
Okay.
Yes, we added baking soda. Okay. A lot of people think that that's what did it. Not me. Not me. Because there was one more change we made to the formula.
Yes, the blur changed colors.
It's blue now.
It's blue now.
It's blue now.
Why did they have to change?
Well, I think figuring out what the blue is can give us a pretty good idea. If it's Pepsi, I don't think that's what it was. But if it was RC Cola, that's absolutely what blew up the stomach. It was not the baking soda. It was RC Cola.
I did
That's
wonder
what did it.
why they switched. Like you would think
Yeah,
if you were
did you
going to do
run out
this,
of- yeah.
you would just buy a ton of the same thing.
Well, okay. They may not have known that they were going to do it twice.
Oh, that's true.
Because
that's
they
true.
did seem
Fair.
rather surprised by how little effect. I mean, like the stomach grew,
Yeah.
like it didn't
Yeah.
have no effect. It's just that like, I think they were testing for like a gastro whatever rupture.
Yeah.
Like that's what they wanted.
It would have
And
been
that's
interesting. You mentioned this.
gastrointestinal.
You mentioned this earlier that we didn't get a lot of Adam and Jamie talking about what they expected. It would have been interesting on this one to hear that. Like, what did they think going in? We don't really get that. It kind of seems like they're sort of like, yeah, there's no way this is going to work. But they did seem surprised, as we are, by how little it actually did.
Yeah.
In the first test.
Yeah.
But when the second test concludes, there is what has become, I think it's one of the first like legendary shots of the show. Of that stomach exploding, and they had put it in like a plexiglass cage, and it just sends the fizz all over the plexiglass. So it hits the camera.
So gross.
It's so gross and so great. It's
awesome.
one of those Mythbusters shots that is always stuck in my memory, and that was used in montages and everything for years to come.
Oh yeah.
It's a legendary moment of the show. It was great.
Which I mean, and same with the rocket car. I have seen it in intros and such, but I had never actually seen the episode.
Yeah. And I think we can say this one is very well and fully busted, even though they don't say that. Yet again, no busted, no plausible, confirmed, nothing in this episode. That I had no idea that was not inherent in the early episodes.
I didn't either.
And
it seems so.
It raises
so much a part of it.
One question in my mind. When they were shooting these episodes, did they know the name of the show? They don't reference it in, as much as I can remember, they never reference the name in the actual like Adam and Jamie footage.
That's a good point.
It's in the narration. Obviously it's in graphics and everything else because by that point they knew. But I wonder if they actually knew what the show was going to be called when they were shooting this.
It depends. Some of it they had to have because I guess it depends on when the interviews were conducted.
Right.
Because all of the people in the interviews do my name is so-and-so and you're watching Mythbusters.
That's true.
You know,
that's
but
true.
It could also be conceivable that they did the experiment already, figured out they needed a little more filler, went back.
That's a whole other great question, which is how was this first season shot?
Yeah.
Did they know going in they were going to do extra interviews and have all the extra stuff, or was it just the experiments and then when the show got picked up, they went back and added in additional information? I would love to talk to somebody about that because you can definitely, again, you can feel the show getting made in this first season, which I like that. I like seeing it come together, but it does feel a little bit, taped together in places. And I'm curious how that happened.
I am too. But I will say there's a self-awareness and there is in my view, a very charming nature to it. It feels very like early YouTube-y to me.
It does.
But with the exception being that anybody is on YouTube, these guys actually know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that makes it more fun.
Totally.
Because you know that the risk of this going fatally wrong is pretty low.
Yeah.
Pretty low. They're gonna game it up. They're gonna use that as a dramatic catalyst, but you're safe.
Yeah.
You're not gonna watch somebody die on camera. They're not gonna show you that.
I think it's fitting that the very first episode of Mythbusters ends with the most gross shots of soda dripping off of a skeleton.
Oh, yes. Okay.
What was your note?
My note was that the final line of this episode, as the credits are rolling, was
Mythbusters tried to contact John Gilchrist, the actor who played Little Mikey. He never returned our calls.
And then that's it. That's literally the last. What is Little Mikey hiding? That's what I need to know.
I didn't even notice that. I think I was looking at the shot.
It really is like it is like all the gross stuff is good, but it's just so funny that like he never returned our call is such like a journalist. Like he's hiding something.
He's avoiding us. Or is he dead? Did he actually die from Pop Rocks and soda?
Is he avoiding us in death?
Well, that is it for episode 1, both of the podcast and of Mythbusters. I think, overall we had our notes, but I think it's pretty clear. We're in for a good time.
It's a great show.
The show is legendary for a reason, and even with the hiccups and the weirdness of it finding itself, it's still more fun than you're going to have with almost any other hour of TV.
I agree.
Such a great experience.
I agree.
Well, coming up next week, we have season 1, episode 2. The myths are Vacuum Toilet, Biscuit Bazooka, and The Leaping Lawyer. I am excited for these. I remember 2 of them, but The Leaping Lawyer, I do not remember. Very, very excited to find out. Hope that if you're listening, you will come back and find out with us. Be sure to watch the episode before you listen to the show. Otherwise, it's going to be a very weird hour for you.
Probably.
And we'll be back next week. Looking forward to it.
Bye-bye, bubbies. Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show is written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Bumgardner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram @TryThisPod or email us trythisathomepod@gmail.com.